I got off the bus in northeastern Tennessee, my duffel bag over one shoulder, rifle case in my right hand. The small station looked almost exactly how I remembered it from 10 years ago, a single-story brick building with peeling paint and a faded sign. Michael's blue pickup truck was parked in the lot. He was leaning against the driver's door, arms crossed, watching me walk up. His face broke into a wide smile as I got closer. "Jim Wilson," he said, walking forward to meet me. "About damn time." We shook hands, then pulled each other into a quick, back-slapping hug. 10 years had added some gray to Michael's beard and a few more lines around his eyes, but he still had the same easy grin I remembered. "Good to see you, Mike," I said, tossing my bags into the truck bed. "Thanks for setting this up." "Been too long," he replied, climbing into the driver's seat. "When you called saying you wanted to hunt the old grounds again, I couldn't believe it." I settled into the passenger seat, the familiar smell of Michael's truck, a mix of coffee, gun oil, and the pine-scented air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror, bringing back memories of our past trips. "How was the bus ride?" Michael asked as he pulled onto the main road. "Long, boring, but cheaper than flying," I said, rolling down the window to let the cool autumn air wash over my face. "Army pension only stretches so far." Michael nodded as he navigated through the small town. "How long's it been since you got out?" 3 years, I said. "Still feels strange sometimes, being a civilian." The town quickly gave way to countryside. Fields and scattered farms lined the 2-lane highway, the mountains rising in the distance, their slopes covered with trees showing the first hints of fall color. "So, what have you been up to all these years?" Michael asked. "Last I heard you were somewhere in Afghanistan." "All over the place, really. Afghanistan, Iraq, a few other spots they don't talk about much on the news. Nothing too exciting. Mostly training local forces. It wasn't the whole truth, but then again, there were parts of my service I didn't care to discuss, even with old friends. And now? Security consulting mostly. Pays the bills." I turned to look at him. "You? Still working at the hardware store?" Michael nodded. "Manager now. Married Lisa. You remember her from high school? Got 2 kids, both boys." "No kidding? Congratulations, man. What about you? Ever settle down?" I shook my head. Never found the right time or the right person. The road began to curve as we entered more mountainous terrain. Michael handled the turns easily, like someone who'd driven these roads many times before. "So, these woods we're headed to, they're part of Cherokee National Forest, right?" I asked. "Yeah, same area we used to hunt more or less. You remember how good the deer hunting was?" Michael's eyes stayed on the road, but I noticed his grip tighten slightly on the steering wheel. "Jim, there's something you should know. There've been some strange stories about these woods the last few years." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of stories?" "Oh, you know how small towns are. People disappearing, weird animal behavior, strange sounds at night." He tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. "Just local superstition, really. People around here love their ghost stories." "People disappearing?" I asked, my interest piqued. During my time in the military, I'd heard similar stories in remote villages across the world. Often there was more truth to them than most people wanted to admit. "Yeah, a few hikers, a hunter or two, but it's a big forest. People get lost all the time. Most of them probably just wandered off trail and got turned around. Most of them." Michael sighed. "There was this one guy, Rick Martinez, good hunter, knew these woods well. He came back from a trip a few years back, claimed something attacked his group. His friends never came back. Rick wasn't the same after that. Started drawing weird pictures, talking about things that didn't make sense. Then one day he just vanished from his house." I watched Michael's face as he spoke. He was trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "You believe any of it?" I asked. He laughed, this time more genuinely. "Come on, Jim. You know me better than that. It's just typical small-town talk. When nothing happens for years, people make up stories to keep themselves entertained." I nodded but didn't respond. In my experience, local stories often had bits of truth, especially in remote areas. People who lived close to the wilderness just seemed to know things differently. The road got narrower and turned to dirt as Michael turned onto a Forest Service road. Trees crowded in on both sides, branches sometimes scratching against the truck. "Almost there," Michael said. "Trailhead's about 10 minutes up this road." I looked out the window as the forest got thicker. The trees, mostly oak and hickory with some pine mixed in, packed together, making a wall of trunks and branches. I'd forgotten how thick the forests were here compared to the more open woods I'd hunted in other parts of the country. "You've been out here recently?" I asked. "Couple months ago, scouting, saw plenty of sign." Michael slowed the truck as the road became rougher. Tracked a buck that would make any hunter proud, hoping he's still around. We came to a small clearing that served as a makeshift parking area. A weathered wooden sign marked the trailhead, its text faded by years of sun and rain. Michael parked the truck and cut the engine. "End of the road," he said. "From here, we walk." We got out and started unloading our gear. I pulled my backpack from the truck bed and checked its contents one more time. Tent, sleeping bag, cooking supplies, food, extra ammunition, force of habit from my military days. Michael put on his own pack and grabbed his rifle. 3 miles to the spot I picked out for our base camp. Then maybe another mile or two to where I've been seeing the most deer sign. I nodded and secured my rifle case to my pack. "Lead the way." The trail started narrow but got a bit wider as we walked deeper into the forest. The air felt cooler under the tree leaves, and our boots crunched on the fallen leaves and pine needles covering the ground. Sunlight broke through gaps in the trees, making bright spots on the forest floor. "So, what's our strategy?" I asked as we walked. "Same as the old days?" Michael ducked under a low-hanging branch. "I figured we'd set up our camp, then scout the area before dark. Tomorrow morning we can head out early, find some good spots to wait. There's a clearing about a mile north of where I want to camp. Deer move through there regularly." I looked around as we hiked, taking in the surroundings. Something felt off, but I couldn't immediately place what it was. Then it hit me. "It's quiet," I said. Michael glanced back at me. "What do you mean?" "The birds. There aren't many. I remember these woods being full of bird sounds." Michael paused, listening. "Huh. Yeah, I guess it is a bit quiet. Probably just the time of year. Or maybe that storm that came through last week pushed them elsewhere." I nodded but wasn't convinced. In my experience, when the forest goes quiet, it usually means something's wrong. We continued walking. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional creaking of trees in the light breeze. After about 2 hours of hiking, the trail began to slope upward. The incline wasn't steep, but with our heavy packs we had to slow down. "How much further?" I asked, adjusting my pack straps. "Not far. There's a small plateau up ahead. Good water source nearby, decent cover." Michael pointed through a gap in the trees. "Should be able to see some nice country from there, too." The sun was getting lower in the sky now, with that late afternoon yellow glow. We needed to set up camp soon to be ready before it got dark. As we climbed, I kept finding myself looking over my shoulder. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck made me feel like we were being watched. I looked around the trees behind us, seeing nothing but trunks and brush. "You okay?" Michael asked, noticing my behavior. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just old habits. When you spend enough time in places where people are trying to kill you, you get jumpy." Michael nodded sympathetically. It must be hard to turn that off. Sometimes. I took one last look behind us before continuing up the trail. Let's get to this campsite of yours before we lose the light. We pressed on, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. I told myself it was just my military instincts being overactive after so long away from the field. Still, as we climbed higher into the quiet forest, I kept my senses sharp and my hand close to the knife on my belt. Another habit I hadn't been able to break since leaving the service. The forest floor started to level out as we reached the top of the hill. My legs burned from the uphill hike. Michael walked a few steps ahead, breathing hard but steady. He'd been right about the plateau. The ground flattened into a natural shelf on the mountainside, and we could see the trees spread out below us. "Should be just up ahead," Michael said, slowing his pace. "There's a nice clearing that—" He stopped abruptly. I nearly walked into him. "What is it?" I asked, moving up beside him. The trees opened to reveal a small clearing, but instead of the empty campsite Michael had described, we found ourselves looking at what appeared to be an active camp. 3 tents were set up around a stone-ringed fire pit. Camping chairs circled the dead fire. A folding table held plates with what looked like half-eaten meals, but there wasn't a person in sight. "This wasn't here when I scouted," Michael said, his voice low. "Someone must have set up since then." I looked around the clearing, military instincts kicking in. Something felt wrong. The setup looked normal enough, standard camping gear, nothing fancy, but the stillness bothered me. No movement, no voices, no sounds of people nearby. "Hello?" Michael called out. "Anybody here?" His voice carried through the trees, but no answer came back. "Let's check it out," I said, slowly moving forward. As we got to the clearing, details became clearer. The food on the plates had dried out and started to mold. A few flies buzzed around them. A pot sat on a small camping stove. Whatever had been cooking now crusted to the sides. 3 backpacks leaned against tree trunks. A deck of playing cards lay scattered across the ground near the chairs as if abandoned mid-game. "Looks like they just walked away," I said, noting the lack of disturbance. No overturned chairs, no signs of a hurried departure. In the middle of eating dinner, Michael picked up one of the plates, looking at the fuzzy remnants of what might have been beans and some kind of meat. "This food's been sitting here for days, maybe a week." I walked around the edge of the camp, taking stock. 3 tents for what looked like 3 campers. Gear was still here. Food supplies hung from a tree branch in a bear bag, well away from the sleeping area. "Maybe they went hiking and got lost," Michael suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe it himself. "And left all their gear? Their food?" I shook my head. No one leaves camp without at least taking water and some basic supplies. "Should we check the tents? Might be something to tell us who they are." I nodded, though the idea of going through someone else's stuff didn't feel right to me. Still, if these people were missing, any information might help explain what happened. The first tent had a sleeping bag, neatly laid out, with a small duffel of clothes beside it. Nothing unusual. The second was similar. Sleeping bag, personal items, a paperback novel opened face down. The third had 2 sleeping bags, suggesting one tent was meant for a couple. "Looks like normal camping stuff," Michael said, backing out of the last tent. "No clue why they'd leave." "No wallets or phones," I noted, so they at least took personal identification with them. That made sense, even if leaving all the camping gear didn't. "Hey, look at this," Michael said, picking up a small notebook from beside one of the camping chairs. He flipped through it. "Hunting journal. Says they got here 5 days ago. Last entry was 3 days back." He handed it to me. I read the final entry. The handwriting was neat, describing hunting conditions and mentioning seeing a big buck, maybe 8-pointer in the area. Nothing about planning to leave or any concerns. "Mike, these people just vanished," I said, looking around the abandoned camp again. No signs of animal attack, no signs of panic. They just left everything behind. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe they had some kind of emergency? Had to leave in a hurry? And didn't pack up any gear? Not even their food or tents? I shook my head again. That's not how emergencies work. You grab what you can carry. I continued my sweep of the perimeter, military training pushing me to search for any evidence, any clue that might explain the situation. About 30 yards from the main camp, near the edge of the clearing, I spotted something hanging from a tree branch. "Mike," I called, keeping my voice steady. "Over here." He joined me, and we both stood looking at the deer carcass hanging from a strong branch. It had been field-dressed, the internal organs removed, but something about the way it had been done looked strange to me. The cuts were incredibly precise, almost surgical in their exactness. But what caught my attention was a perfect circular cut on the deer's abdomen, about 3 inches in diameter. "You ever see a hunting knife make a cut like that?" I asked, pointing to the circle. Michael stepped closer, examining the wound. "No, that's weird. Too perfect." "Yeah," I agreed. The cut was unnaturally precise, the edges clean without any jagged lines or hesitation marks you'd expect from a knife. "Almost looks like it was done with some kind of tool." "Circular saw attachment, maybe?" Michael suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. The longer we stood there, the more uncomfortable I became. Between the abandoned camp and this strangely butchered deer, my instincts were screaming that something was very wrong here. "We should move on," I said, turning away from the deer. "Find another spot to camp." Michael nodded quickly, looking relieved at the suggestion. "Yeah, I know another clearing about 2 miles further on the trail. We can make it before dark." We left the abandoned camp undisturbed, neither of us wanting to touch anything else. As we hiked away, I kept looking back over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching us again, even stronger now. "You think we should report this when we get back to town?" Michael asked after we'd been walking for about 20 minutes. "Definitely," I said. 3 people don't just walk away from their camp without a reason. The incident with Rick Martinez that Michael had mentioned earlier came to mind. I wondered if there was a connection, but decided not to bring it up yet. No need to feed our already growing nervousness. "Here we go," Michael said as we reached another small clearing. "This is where I planned for us to camp originally." The spot was good. Relatively flat ground, a small stream nearby providing water, and enough open space for our tents while still having trees around for cover. In my military days, I would have approved of the location from a tactical standpoint. Good visibility, with a rock formation at our backs, preventing anything from approaching from behind. We set up camp efficiently, working in the fading light. 2 tents, a small fire pit, and our gear organized within easy reach. Years of camping together in our younger days made the process automatic, with minimal need for discussion. As darkness fell completely, we sat beside the fire, eating a simple meal of beef jerky and rehydrated stew. Neither of us mentioned the abandoned camp or the deer with its perfect circular wound, but I could tell it worried Michael as much as it worried me. "Got an early start tomorrow?" I asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. "Yeah," Michael nodded, staring into the fire. "There's a good spot about a mile north of here. Ridge overlooks a valley where deer pass through regularly." I added a few more sticks to the fire, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal animals, just the crackling of our fire and the occasional breeze through the trees. "I'm going to turn in," Michael said eventually, standing up and stretching. "Need to be fresh for tomorrow." I stayed by the fire after he went to his tent, thinking about the empty camp we found. In all my years of hunting and being in the military, I'd never come across anything like it. People don't just walk away from their stuff, food, and shelter without a good reason. When I finally went to my own tent, I put my hunting knife next to my sleeping bag where I could grab it easily. I was going to leave my rifle in its case, but changed my mind and leaned it against the tent wall by my head. I couldn't sleep well. I kept waking up to every sound, branches breaking, leaves moving, the stream running. Each time I'd reach for my knife before I was even fully awake. In the middle of the night, I just lay there looking up at the tent, unable to forget that deer with the perfectly round wound. Whatever cut it wasn't like any hunting knife I knew about. The few times I did fall asleep, I dreamed about those empty camping chairs and half-eaten meals left behind by people who had walked into the forest and never came back. I was jolted awake by a terrible scream that cut through the night. My eyes snapped open as I lay frozen in my sleeping bag. The sound hung in the air, not quite animal, not quite human, before fading into the darkness. For several seconds I didn't move, trying to hear anything beyond my own breathing. The forest had gone completely silent after that cry. No insects chirping, no night birds calling, nothing but quiet all around. I reached for my knife first, then my rifle. The weapon didn't make me feel much better about whatever had made that sound. I unzipped my tent slowly, trying to stay quiet. Outside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, giving just enough light to see Michael already standing by his tent. His face looked pale in the dim orange light, eyes wide and staring at the tree line. "You heard it too," I said, keeping my voice low. Michael nodded, not taking his eyes off the dense wall of trees surrounding our clearing. Woke me right up. I stepped fully out of my tent, rifle held ready but pointed at the ground. The night air felt unusually cold against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. "Mountain lion," I suggested, though my voice wavered with uncertainty. I'd heard mountain lions scream before. They could sound disturbingly human. But this had been different. Deeper, more guttural, with an almost mechanical quality to it. Michael shook his head slowly. "That's no cat," he whispered. "That's what took those people at the camp." The statement hung in the air, and we both avoided talking more about it. I went to the fire pit and started adding small sticks to the embers to make the fire bigger. We needed the light and warmth now, especially with something out there in the dark. "We should keep watch," I said, feeding larger sticks into the growing flames. "Take shifts until morning." Michael nodded and sat heavily on one of the logs we'd positioned as seats. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his canteen. "You want to tell me what's really going on here, Mike?" I asked, settling across from him. "You've been on edge since we arrived. And now this." Michael stared into the fire for a long moment. The flames cast shifting shadows across his face, deepening the lines around his eyes and mouth. "Remember I mentioned Rick Martinez?" he finally said. "The hunter who came back alone and then disappeared," I recalled. "Yeah." Michael took a deep breath. "What I didn't tell you is that Rick was a friend of mine. Not close, but we'd hunted together a few times." I watched Michael's face carefully as he continued. "Rick's group went missing in this same area. When he came back alone 3 days later, he was different. Kept talking about something in the woods that wasn't natural. Said it moved too fast, was too tall and thin to be human." Michael paused, taking another drink from his canteen. I noticed his knuckles were white where he gripped it. At first, everyone thought he was in shock, that he'd seen his friends die in some kind of accident and his mind couldn't handle it. But Rick insisted something had attacked them, something that screamed just like what we heard tonight. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks into the night air. Both of us flinched at the sound. "Rick started drawing pictures," Michael continued. "Covered the walls of his house with them. Always the same thing. This tall, thin creature with these weird circular markings. He'd draw them over and over, sometimes not sleeping for days. And then he disappeared," I said. Michael nodded. Just vanished from his house one night. Door locked from inside, windows closed. When the sheriff searched the place, they found those drawings everywhere. On the walls, the ceiling, even scratched into the wooden floor. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "I thought they were just stories," Michael admitted, his shoulders slumping. "Rick had problems before all this happened. Drank too much, got into fights. Easy to write off what he said as the ramblings of a man who'd lost his friends in some accident and couldn't cope." He looked up at me, his face scared. "But that sound, that's exactly how Rick described it. And those people at the camp yesterday, they vanished just like Rick's friends." I put another log on the fire and the flames got bigger. From my time in the military, I learned to look at threats with a clear head, not letting fear take over. But I also learned to trust my gut, and something about all this just didn't feel right. "We should head back in the morning," I suggested. "Report the abandoned camp, let the authorities handle it." Michael nodded but didn't speak. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "I'll take first watch," I finally said. "Try to get some sleep. I'll wake you in 4 hours." "I don't think I can sleep after that," Michael replied, but he returned to his tent anyway. I sat with my back to the fire, letting my eyes get used to the dark, but staying warm. My rifle was on my knees, loaded and ready. The night seemed to go on forever as I listened for anything coming close. Nothing came. No more screams, no movement in the bushes. Just the deep quiet of the forest. When it started getting light in the east, I felt myself relax a bit. Daylight made things feel normal again. Like the scary stuff from the night was all in my head. Michael came out of his tent as the sun started to rise. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, with bloodshot eyes and dark circles under them. "Anything?" he asked. I shook my head. Quiet all night. Too quiet. We made breakfast in silence, heating water for instant coffee, and eating energy bars from our packs. Doing these normal tasks helped calm us down, making us feel a bit better after the weird night. "So, what's the plan?" Michael asked as he sipped his coffee. "Still want to head back?" I thought about the question. In daylight, the scream that woke us didn't seem as scary anymore, and we'd driven so far to go hunting. "We came here to hunt," I said finally. "Seems a shame to turn back now." Michael looked surprised. "After everything I told you about Rick? After what we heard?" "We don't know what made that sound," I reasoned, though part of me wondered if I was trying to convince myself more than Michael. Could have been any number of animals. And as for Rick and those campers, people go missing in national forests all the time. They get lost, fall into ravines, have medical emergencies miles from help. Even as I said it, I knew I was making excuses. The abandoned camp with its half-eaten meals and the deer with that weird round hole didn't match up with anything normal. But now that it was daytime, I felt braver, and my military training made me not want to run from something I couldn't see. "We've come too far to turn back now," I added. "One day of hunting, then we can head out tomorrow morning." Michael didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. "All right. But we stick together. No splitting up." Agreed. We packed our day bags with water, food, and extra ammunition. I checked my rifle thoroughly, cleaning and oiling it with more care than usual. Then I counted my ammunition twice, storing extra rounds in easily accessible pockets. These weren't the preparations of someone hunting deer anymore. I was preparing for something else entirely. As we set out from camp, the forest seemed almost welcoming in the morning light. Birds had returned, their calls filling the air as they moved between branches. The bushes rustled with small animals going about their business. It was hard to believe this was the same silent, menacing place from the night before. "There's a ridge about a mile north," Michael said as we walked. "Good spot to watch for deer crossing the valley below." I nodded, but my attention was split between watching around us and thinking about what Michael had told me about Rick Martinez. The story bothered me more than I wanted to admit. In my military career, I'd met people suffering from trauma and PTSD. Their experiences were real to them, even when their minds had changed the details. But for Rick to disappear like that, after describing something that matched what we'd heard last night. "This ridge much farther?" I asked, pushing the thoughts aside to focus on our immediate situation. "Should be just ahead," Michael replied, pointing through a gap in the trees. "We can set up there, have a good view of the valley." We continued forward, moving carefully and quietly like we'd done on many hunts before. But I knew we were both listening for something other than deer now, both watching for movement that didn't belong in these woods. Whatever had screamed in the night was still out there. The daylight helped, but I still had this nagging feeling that something was watching us, just waiting to show itself. The afternoon sun came through the tree cover as Mike and I went through the woods. I kept my steps light, placing each boot carefully to avoid snapping twigs or crunching leaves. Old hunting habits mixed with military training made my movements almost automatic. The forest had come alive during daylight hours. Birds called overhead. Small creatures rustled in the bushes. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of that scream from last night. Mike walked slightly ahead, his eyes constantly looking around the ground and the spaces between trees. He'd been quieter than usual since breakfast, his earlier skepticism about the strange happenings now replaced with a worried alertness that matched my own. We stayed close, never more than 10 feet apart, our agreement to stick together a silent acknowledgement of the danger we both felt lurking in these woods. I had my rifle with me, though a small voice in the back of my mind questioned whether it would be enough against whatever had made that inhuman sound. I pushed the thought away and focused on the hunt. "This ridge has always been good for deer," Mike whispered, gesturing ahead where the land sloped gently down into a small valley. They crossed through that clearing on their way to the stream. I nodded, following where he was looking. The spot had a good view, with clear sight and enough cover to keep us hidden. We got down behind a fallen oak, using the mossy trunk to steady my rifle. For the next hour, we waited in silence. The sun inched across the sky, changing the patterns of light and dark on the ground. I heard normal wildlife sounds all around, but still couldn't relax. My eyes kept moving from the clearing to the darker parts of the forest behind us. "Look," Mike breathed suddenly, tapping my arm. I followed his look to the edge of the clearing. A buck had come out from the trees, the biggest I'd seen in years. Its massive antlers shined in the sun as it moved carefully into the open, with its head up, sniffing for danger. "8-pointer at least," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. "Maybe 10. My pulse quickened as I slowly raised my rifle. Through the scope, the buck looked impressive, muscular and alert. I lined up the shot carefully, putting the crosshairs just behind the front shoulder. I took a breath and held it, finger on the trigger. I focused only on the buck and my finger pressure. One more slight squeeze and a deep, loud roar came from behind the buck. It sounded wild and didn't belong in these woods at all. I jumped in surprise and my rifle moved just as I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. The buck jumped sideways, hit, but not fatally. It ran into the trees, leaving small drops of blood on the fallen leaves. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, scanning the trees where the sound had come from. My hands had gone cold, a chill working its way up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Mike didn't answer right away. When I glanced at him, his face had drained of color, his eyes wide as he stared at the spot where the buck had disappeared. "We need to get our gear and go," he said finally, his voice strained. "Right now." He was already standing, no longer concerned about moving quietly. I rose beside him, rifle ready, eyes searching the forest edge for any sign of movement. "That sound," I started. "I know what it was." Mike cut me off. "Same as last night, just closer." We hurried back toward camp, moving fast but staying alert. Neither of us talked as we made our way back, but I knew we were thinking the same thing. Whatever had screamed in the night was out during daylight too. That thought gave me the creeps. The camp looked normal when we got back. Tent still standing, our stuff where we'd left it. Mike right away started grabbing what we needed and stuffing it into his pack. "We can leave the rest," he said, not looking up from his task. "Just take what we need to get back to the truck." I put my rifle down and walked toward my tent, but stopped. I remembered the hurt buck, the blood on the leaves, how it stumbled before standing up again. A gut shot would make it die slowly and painfully if no one helped it. "Mike," I said, "that buck is wounded. We can't just leave it suffering." He stopped packing and stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Are you serious right now? After everything that's happened?" "It's not right," I insisted. "That's not how we hunt. You know that." Even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous I sounded. Something weird was in these woods. Something that had made 3 campers disappear and had scared Rick Martinez until he disappeared too. Yet here I stood, arguing about hunting ethics. Mike ran a hand through his hair, stuck between fear and principle. Finally, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "We follow the blood trail, put the buck down clean, then we get the hell out of here. No detours, no delays." I grabbed my knife and checked my rifle, making sure I had enough ammunition. Mike did the same with his own weapon. We left most of our gear in camp, taking only water, a few energy bars, and our hunting equipment. The blood trail was easy to follow at first. Bright crimson spots on fallen leaves, smears on low-hanging branches where the wounded animal had brushed past. The buck had headed straight down into the valley, probably seeking the dense cover of the lower forest. "Blood still bright," Mike observed as we moved. "Clean hit, but not immediately fatal." I nodded, looking ahead. Hopefully we can catch up before it gets too far. The trail led us deeper into the forest than we'd been before, away from the hunting grounds we knew. Soon, the trees grew thicker, with very old trunks standing tall. The tree cover above became denser, blocking most of the sunlight. What had been a warm afternoon now felt noticeably cooler, the air heavier and somehow stale. I checked my watch, almost 4 o'clock. We still had several hours before sunset, but down here in the valleys, darkness would come earlier. "We should set a time limit," I said quietly. "If we don't find it by 5, we turn back." Mike nodded without looking at me, his attention fixed on the blood trail. It was growing sparser now, the drops smaller and further apart. "It's slowing down, losing less blood," he said. "That's good and bad. Means it might survive, but it'll be harder to track." Every few minutes I stopped to look behind us, making sure we could find our way back. Old trees began to look the same after a while, and the thick brush made it hard to see landmarks. I found myself marking trees with small cuts from my knife, leaving breadcrumbs to follow home. The silence in this part of the forest was weird. No birds called here, no squirrels chattered in the branches. The only sounds were our breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath our boots. "Mike," I said after nearly 40 minutes of tracking, "how much further do we go?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes on the ground searching for the next blood spot. When he looked up, his face showed the same unease I felt. "There," he pointed to a small smear on a fallen log. "It's still moving, but slowly now." We pushed on, following the trail that was getting harder to walk. The trees seemed to close in around us, with their branches sticking out everywhere. Moss hung from the branches in long gray strips, making the forest feel very old. I kept looking behind me, feeling like someone was watching us from the dark spots between trees. My foot caught on a root and I almost fell. Mike grabbed my arm to help me. He held on too tight, his face looking stressed out. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." I nodded, glancing back the way we'd come. The path behind us looked different somehow, the trees more crowded together than I remembered. "But I think we need to turn back soon. This is farther than we planned." Mike hesitated, then pointed ahead. "Look at the blood. There's more of it now. I think the buck might be down. It's bleeding out." He was right. The drops had become a steady trail again, leading toward a patch of thick bushes about 30 yards ahead. "Okay," I said reluctantly. "We check that thicket, then we head back, regardless." We approached slowly, rifles ready. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, cold enough now that I could see my breath forming small clouds. Strange for early autumn, even in the mountains. A heavy stillness hung in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I kept looking behind us, unable to shake the feeling we were making a terrible mistake. Every instinct from my military days screamed danger, but I pushed forward alongside Mike, not wanting to abandon him or the wounded animal we were tracking. The blood trail led straight to the thicket. Dark spatters marked the path into a small depression in the forest floor, hidden by a ring of thick brush. Mike moved ahead of me, pushing aside branches to reveal what lay beyond. He stopped suddenly, his body going rigid. The rifle in his hands dropped toward the ground as he stood frozen, staring at something I couldn't yet see. "Mike," I whispered, moving up beside him. When I saw what lay in the depression, I understood his reaction. The buck was there, but not in any condition I had expected. My shot hadn't been fatal. Something else had finished the job. Mike took a step back, bumping into me. Neither of us spoke as we stared at the scene before us. The buck now lay cut open, its entrails spread around its body in a pattern that looked deliberate rather than random. But what scared me most was the perfectly circular incision on its abdomen, identical to the one on the deer carcass we'd found at the abandoned camp. I stared at the scene before us, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The dead buck lay cut open, its body messed up in a way that wasn't like normal animal attacks. The guts hadn't been eaten or thrown around like a predator would do. They were placed in a clear pattern around the body, like symbols or signs made of flesh and blood. "We need to leave. Now," I whispered, taking a step backward, my eyes still fixed on the mutilated animal. Mike nodded, his face pale. "Yeah." His voice was full of fear from a man who finally believed what he'd been denying. We turned to head back, walking as quietly as we could. I looked one more time at the buck, my stomach turning as I remembered my shot that had brought it to this horrible death. A branch snapped nearby, the sound loud and clear in the weird silence of the forest. We both froze. 20 yards away, something moved between the trees. I tried hard to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear or any animal I knew, just a dark shape, taller than a person but wrong somehow. Too thin, its body all stretched out and weird. It moved with quick, jerky movements that hurt my brain to watch. "Run!" Mike hissed, his voice barely audible. We ran through the forest, forgetting about being quiet. My boots hit the ground hard as I jumped over logs and pushed through bushes. All the trees looked the same, and I couldn't tell which way to go in my panic. I just knew we needed to get far away from whatever was behind us. Behind us, something crashed through the bushes, chasing us. The noise got louder and closer, no matter how fast we ran. It moved through the forest incredibly fast, catching up with every second. I looked back quickly and wished I hadn't. What I saw made no sense. Its body was too long and angular, with limbs bent in ways that shouldn't be possible. It seemed to change shape as it moved, like it wasn't really part of our world. Looking at it hurt my eyes and gave me a headache. The creature made that same strange scream we'd heard that morning and the night before. but now it was right behind us, and the sound seemed to shake inside my head. It sounded like tearing metal and electricity combined, nothing like any animal on Earth. "Keep going," I shouted to Mike, who ran a few feet ahead of me. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, my military training kicking in. The years I spent running with full gear through the desert heat helped me now as adrenaline rushed through my body. My mind cleared, and I focused only on staying alive, one foot in front of the other, faster. Don't look back again. We crashed through a bunch of bushes with branches slapping across my face. I felt something warm running down my cheek, blood from a scratch, but I didn't even feel the pain. All that mattered was getting away. "Which way?" Mike gasped between labored breaths. I looked at the sun through the trees, trying to figure out where we were. "Camp's that way." I pointed a bit to the left of where we were heading. We turned and headed that direction, pushing through thick bushes. The sounds behind us got louder. Whatever was chasing us wasn't giving up. If anything, it seemed to be moving faster now, more confident, like it was playing with us. "It's hurting us," I realized with sudden clarity. The thought was so terrifying I almost stumbled. This wasn't mindless chase, it was calculated. We broke into a small clearing, momentarily exposed. The scream came again, this time from somewhere to our right, cutting off our path toward camp. Mike skidded to a halt, looking wildly in that direction. "We can't go that way," I gasped, grabbing his shoulder. "We need to head straight for the truck. Forget the camp." Mike nodded, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "Next ridge," he panted. "If we can get over it, it's mostly downhill to the service road." We ran toward the ridge, the ground beginning to slope upward. My thighs burned with the effort of the climb, but fear drove me onward. Behind us, the crashing sounds continued, broken up by that awful scream that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The ridge stood tall ahead, steep and challenging. We scrambled up, grabbing roots and saplings to pull ourselves higher. Loose soil gave way under my boots, making the climb dangerous. Mike reached the top first, turning to offer me his hand. As he pulled me up, I heard something moving through the trees below, not following our path up the ridge, but circling around. It knew these woods better than we did. It was cutting us off. "It's going around," I warned, barely able to speak through heaving breaths. We didn't wait. As soon as I reached the top of the ridge, we ran down the other side. The way down was steep, almost a controlled fall rather than a run. I slipped several times, sliding on dead leaves and loose dirt. One bad fall could mean a broken ankle, and then... I didn't finish the thought. Couldn't afford to consider that outcome. The forest thinned slightly as we went down, letting us move faster. I tried to picture the map in my head, figuring out where we were compared to where we'd parked. If we kept going downhill, we should eventually hit the service road. From there, it would be a clear path to the truck. "You think it's still behind us?" Mike asked during a brief moment when we slowed to navigate around a fallen tree. As if in answer, that unearthly scream tore through the forest again, this time from somewhere off to our left. It sounded frustrated, angry. "Does that answer your question?" I replied, pushing forward again. We continued our desperate run through the woods as the light got dimmer and afternoon turned to evening. The forest around us looked scary, with shadows getting deeper between the trees. Every dark space between trunks seemed to hide someone watching us. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I fell flat on my face. I hit the ground hard and couldn't breathe for a second. My rifle slid away across the forest floor. Mike was at my side instantly, pulling me up. "Leave it," he urged when I looked back at the fallen weapon. He was right. Even with all my military training, a rifle wouldn't help against whatever was chasing us. This wasn't something that could be fought, only escaped. We pushed on, moving as fast as our tired bodies allowed. The land kept sloping downward, getting steeper in places. We used the descent to our advantage, letting gravity pull us forward. Through gaps in the trees ahead, I spotted something that excited me: the dirt service road that led back to our parking area. We were close now, maybe half a mile from the truck. "There," I gasped, pointing. "The road." Mike's face showed a flash of hope. "If we can reach the truck—" A crashing sound from directly ahead cut him off. Something was moving through the trees between us and the road, moving fast. We skidded to a halt, then turned sharply to the right, trying to go around whatever blocked our path. The forest seemed to close in around us, with branches everywhere and bushes catching our ankles. "It's trying to trap us," I said, the realization settling like ice in my gut. "Cutting off our escape routes." Mike's expression hardened. "We split up," he said. "Give one of us a chance." "No," I shot back. "That's exactly what it wants." I had no rational basis for this claim, but every instinct in my body told me separation meant death. We needed to stay together, to watch each other's backs. We changed direction again, angling back toward the road but approaching from a different angle. The sounds of pursuit moved, adjusting to our new course. This game of cat and mouse couldn't continue forever. Eventually, fatigue would slow us down. Already my legs felt heavy, my lungs raw from gasping the cold forest air. The trees thinned suddenly and we burst onto the dirt service road. I felt so relieved when I saw the packed dirt path going through the forest. "Left," Mike gasped. "Truck's about quarter mile." We ran down the middle of the road, finally able to move without anything in our way. The open space should have felt safer, but instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable. The trees on both sides seemed too thick and dark to see through. No sounds of anyone following us came from behind us now. It was way too quiet again, except for our heavy breathing and our feet hitting the dirt road. The quiet was somehow worse than when we heard someone chasing us. At least then we knew where the danger was. Now it could be anywhere. The parking area showed up ahead, a small clearing with an old wooden sign, and there, looking bright in the late afternoon sun, was the blue metal of Mike's pickup truck. "We're gonna make it," Mike said between ragged breaths, a hint of hope entering his voice. I wanted to believe him, but the silence from the forest felt watchful, patient, as if our pursuer had simply changed tactics rather than given up. We were 20 yards from the truck when that bone-chilling scream split the air once more. Not from behind us or from the sides, but from directly ahead, between us and the vehicle. We stumbled to a halt as something stepped onto the road in front of the truck. In the clear light of the open area, I finally saw it fully. My mind rebelled at the sight. It stood impossibly tall, its limbs too long and jointed in ways that defied human anatomy. Its skin, if it could be called that, seemed to change between solid and transparent, revealing glimpses of something beneath that looked like intricate clockwork or circuitry. Its face was the worst part. Not a face at all, but a smooth, featureless surface marked with circular patterns that matched exactly the wounds we'd found on the deer. "Oh, God," Mike whispered beside me. The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding us with what felt like cold curiosity. It made no move to approach, simply standing between us and our escape. "What do we do?" Mike's voice cracked with fear. I had no answer. Running back into the forest meant we'd die. Moving toward that thing seemed just as dumb. I'd been in firefights and combat where I thought I might die, but nothing had prepared me for how scared I was. The creature raised one long arm, pointing right at us. The circles on its body started to glow, pulsing in a pattern. It was clear. It was singling us out. While I stood there frozen, I heard something in the distance. Car engines and people talking, coming up the service road behind the creature. Probably weekend hikers or hunters getting to the trailhead. The creature's head turned to the sound. It seemed to think for a second. Then it moved quickly back into the forest beside the road, disappearing completely. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. "Now!" I shouted, grabbing Mike's arm and pulling him forward. We ran the rest of the way to the truck. Mike dropped his keys, his hands shaking too much to hold them. I kept looking around the trees for any sign of the creature. The truck door opened with a squeak that felt weirdly normal after what we'd just seen. We jumped inside and Mike got the key in. The engine started up with a roar. As we drove away, kicking up dust on the service road, I kept watching the forest beside us. Something moved in the trees, keeping up with our truck for a few seconds before falling behind. We hit the paved road and Mike floored it, the truck sliding before straightening out. Only when the forest was far behind us and we got onto the highway with other cars did I finally start breathing normally again. Neither of us talked. Mike's hands were tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. I looked down and saw my hands still shaking, still full of adrenaline. I couldn't stop seeing that creature in my head. We drove in silence, getting farther from the forest. But being far away didn't help much. Whatever we ran into back there had changed how I saw the world. Some things you can't forget once you've seen them. And sometimes you realize you weren't hunting anything. You were being hunted. The forest became a blur as Michael and I sprinted between trees, jumping over fallen logs and crashing through brush. The thing behind us moved with impossible speed, gaining ground even with our head start. I felt branches whipping my face, but fear numbed any pain. Michael stumbled on a root ahead of me, pitching forward with a sharp cry. I grabbed his arm and yanked him up without breaking stride. "Keep moving," I shouted. The creature screamed again, the sound coming from everywhere at once. I'd been in the military and faced a lot of dangers, but nothing ever scared me like this. Whatever was hunting us in these woods wasn't normal. We reached a steep hill and half ran, half slid down its side. The loose soil gave way under our boots, sending dirt and leaves tumbling down. I almost fell a few times but stayed up by grabbing saplings and roots. Going down was messy, but it gave us some space from whatever was chasing us. Through gaps in the trees, I saw Michael's truck. Seeing it gave me a burst of energy even though I was dead tired. "There!" I gasped, pointing. With new energy, we made the final push toward the vehicle. Our lungs were burning and our legs felt heavy. The parking area was just ahead, so close. But behind us, the creature smashed through the bushes, not slowed down by the steep hills we'd climbed. We ran into the small clearing where the truck waited. Michael struggled with his keys, his hands shaking. The keys jingled loudly in the quiet clearing. I turned around, rifle raised, watching our backs. The trees looked dark. I noticed movement, and through the trees, I saw it clearly for the first time, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The creature was at least 8 feet tall, with super long limbs bent at weird angles. Its skin looked like it changed between solid and see-through, showing something underneath that looked like complex machinery. The worst part was the perfect circular patterns across its body, just like the wounds on the deer. Its face was smooth with no features except more of those circular patterns where eyes should be. I couldn't pull the trigger. Something told me bullets wouldn't work against this thing. "Get in!" Michael yelled, finally managing to unlock the doors. I backed toward the truck, unable to look away from the scary thing at the edge of the woods. The creature turned its head at an impossible angle, watching us like it was curious. Then it moved, so fast I couldn't follow it. We jumped inside the truck. The engine started just as something hit my window hard enough to crack the glass. I screamed, jerking away. Through the cracked glass, I saw those circular patterns pressing against the window. A long, thin arm scratched across the roof, making a sound like nails on a chalkboard. The truck skidded onto the dirt road, tires kicking up gravel as Michael pushed the gas pedal all the way down. The sudden jolt knocked the creature off, and I saw it stumble back before it vanished. We raced away, the engine loud and straining. The woods disappeared behind us, changing to open fields and later small houses and businesses. Regular life went on here, far from what we'd just seen. Only when we hit the highway miles later, joining the steady stream of cars, did either of us finally speak. 1 week after our escape from the Tennessee woods, I sat on the cramped balcony of my apartment, holding a lukewarm beer that I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The evening had cooled, but I barely noticed. My mind was still trapped in those woods, replaying our encounter over and over. I couldn't sleep well anymore. Each night I would lie in bed, exhausted but afraid to close my eyes. When I did drift off, the nightmares came immediately. Vivid flashes of that thing with its weird shape and those perfect, circular patterns across its body. Sometimes I dreamed of the deer, cut open with surgical precision, entrails arranged in patterns that seemed to mean something I couldn't understand. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. My phone lit up with a text. Michael checking in as he had every day since we got back. His messages were always casual, talking about normal things, work, his kids' baseball games, weather. Never once had he mentioned what we saw. I ignored the message. We'd spoken only once since that day when he dropped me off at my apartment. The ride back to town had been completely silent until we pulled into my parking lot. "Let's just forget about it," he'd said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Bad trip, bad weather. That's all people need to know." I'd looked at him, noticing the new gray hairs at his temples that hadn't been there a week earlier. "You think that's possible? To just forget?" He'd gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I have a family, a normal life. I can't." His voice had cracked then. "I just can't." I understood. What place did our experience have in the ordinary world? How could we possibly explain it to anyone who hadn't been there? So I'd nodded, grabbed my gear, and watched him drive away. Since then, I'd thrown myself into research. My security consulting work sat neglected as I dug through local newspaper archives, online forums, and historical records. My apartment walls now displayed a makeshift investigation board, printouts, maps, and notes connected by red string. If anyone saw it, they'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. The pattern I found was undeniable. People had been disappearing in those woods for decades. Most cases were written off as hikers getting lost, hunters having accidents, or runaways leaving town. But the frequency was too high, the circumstances too similar to be coincidence. I took a long pull from my forgotten beer, grimacing at its warmth, and went back inside to my living room. The article about Rick Martinez lay open on my coffee table. The headline read, "Local Hunter Missing. Strange Circumstances Puzzle Authorities." The photo showed a normal-looking guy, bearded and flannel-shirted, smiling at the camera with a deer he'd bagged in happier times. According to the article, Rick had returned from a hunting trip alone, his 3 companions nowhere to be found. He filed a missing persons report, but couldn't give a coherent explanation of what happened. In the weeks that followed, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He covered his walls with drawings and stopped going to work. Then one morning, he was simply gone. Vanished from a house locked from the inside. What caught my attention were the quotes from Rick's neighbors and family. His cousin mentioned that Rick had become obsessed with perfect circles and kept talking about the way it moved, all wrong, like it wasn't really there. A neighbor reported hearing Rick screaming in his sleep about something hunting them. Rick wasn't the only one. I'd found 5 similar cases spanning 30 years. People who returned from those woods changed, who spoke of impossible things before they too disappeared. One woman in 1992 had filled notebooks with descriptions of a creature that matched exactly what we had seen. She vanished 3 weeks after her camping trip. Most disturbing were the animal mutilations. Reports going back to the 1970s described hunters finding game with strange, circular wounds. Forest rangers had attributed them to poachers using unusual tools or cult activity, but the consistency over decades suggested something else entirely. I rubbed my eyes, trying to ease the burning from lack of sleep. The wall clock showed 2:17 a.m., another night spent chasing answers that probably didn't exist. In Afghanistan, I'd learned that understanding your enemy was essential to survival. Know their tactics, their capabilities, their weaknesses. But this enemy defied understanding. The more I researched, the more I became convinced that whatever lurked in those woods wasn't something that could be categorized or explained by human knowledge. My military training had taught me to face threats head-on. My hunting background had taught me the patience and focus of a predator. For most of my life, I'd been comfortable with the idea that humans were at the top of the food chain. But now I knew better. We weren't the apex predator. We just hadn't met the thing that was. The realization didn't come with fear, but with a strange acceptance. There were things in this world, or perhaps not entirely in this world, that humans weren't equipped to understand or confront. Things that existed in the blind spots of our perception, in the shadows of our knowledge. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, untouched by the knowledge that had fundamentally altered mine. They went to work, raised families, complained about traffic and taxes, blissfully unaware that reality was far more vast and terrifying than they could imagine. Part of me wanted to warn them, to shout from the rooftops that danger lurked in those seemingly peaceful Tennessee woods. But who would listen? Who would believe? I'd sound like Rick Martinez, another unstable veteran with PTSD, seeing threats where none existed. The truth was, I couldn't prove anything. All I had were my experiences, my nightmares, and a collection of similar stories spanning decades. Not enough for anyone to take action, certainly not enough to convince authorities to investigate. And maybe that was for the best. What good would come from others experiencing what Michael and I had? What purpose would be served by more people confronting something they couldn't fight or understand? I returned to my makeshift investigation board and began taking it down piece by piece. The maps, the articles, the notes. I gathered them all and shoved them into a cardboard box. Not because I doubted their truth, but because I'd reached the end of the road. There were no more answers to find, no solutions to discover. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Some predators weren't meant to be hunted. And some places in this world were better left alone. I thought about the men I'd served with in the military, how we'd face death together and come out the other side. I thought about the hunts I'd been on, tracking deer through forests much like those Tennessee woods. In all those experiences, there had been fear, yes, but also a sense of agency, of being an active participant rather than merely prey. What we'd encountered in those woods had stripped away that illusion of control. It had revealed us for what we truly were, just another species on this planet, vulnerable and ultimately insignificant in the face of forces we couldn't comprehend. The box of research materials sat sealed on my kitchen table. I considered burning it, erasing all evidence of my investigation, but something stopped me. Maybe someday someone else would come looking for answers about those woods. Maybe my findings, incomplete as they were, might help them avoid our fate, or at least understand what they were facing. As dawn broke over the city, I made a promise to myself. I would never return to those Tennessee woods. Whatever very old, evil thing had made its home there could keep its territory. There were plenty of other places to hunt, other mountains to climb, other forests to explore. The world was wide, and one small section of it could remain untouched by me. I would try to move forward, to reclaim some semblance of a normal life. The nightmares would fade eventually, or at least become bearable. The weight of knowledge would lighten with time. And maybe, years from now, I might even convince myself that what we experienced was something other than what it seemed. A trick of light and shadow, an episode of shared delusion brought on by fear and isolation. But deep down, I knew better. And on quiet nights when the world grew still, I would remember those perfect circular patterns, the impossible movement of limbs that defied anatomy, and the bone-chilling scream that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I would remember, and I would stay away. Some things weren't meant to be understood, some places weren't meant to be disturbed, and some hunts were better left unfinished.